kids being rushed to the hospital for what would only be described as explosive diarrhea. We've never seen any of those reports. Now, part of the conspiracy is it was covered up because the SpongeBob SquarePants defecation Brazilian broadcast happened right before the Rio Olympics. And so they didn't want the publicity that a bunch of kids were just everywhere as world leaders and athletes from all around the globe are coming there, and they're like, oh, bro, like they didn't want that. Now, the other side of the theory is that it wasn't a actual SpongeBob SquarePants broadcast. Someone had jacked the signal. Someone basically made their own SpongeBob episode and inserted it into the feed for the actual SpongeBob channel or where the SpongeBob episode would be. So it was a fake episode specifically to make people do this. First explanation was it was a SpongeBob episode and it just happened to have this effect. Then the theory was, no, it was a bootleg SpongeBob episode that was specifically designed to make kids go poop. Just blow their butthole up. So let's take a look at that. Now again, we don't have any proof that the SpongeBob SquarePants defecation incident ever happened. We don't. And we do have it with the Pokemon story. At least the kids being rushed to the hospital. But let's look at the idea that there was a bootleg episode. Is it possible that someone would have a reason to make all the kids in a particular geographic area have uncontrollable diarrhea to the point where they're being transported from their home to the hospital? So keep that in your mind for a second, because we're going to work with that in a moment. However, one of the interesting pushbacks to the whole SpongeBob SquarePants idea of it being a broadcast is that we're leading up to the Olympics. So we're in the year 2016. And this is where I'm not meaning any insult to my Brazilian listeners or my friends in Brazil. But when the Olympics were coming up, there was a serious concern with the water supply in Rio de Janeiro. Here was a headline. This was a headline from an article when I was researching this. Rio 2016. Swimmers need to ingest only 3 teaspoons of water to be almost certain of contracting a virus. So in the city of Rio, you have waterways that are infected with raw human sewage, and this water can make you have diarrhea. They were telling people who are coming over to Brazil, don't put your head underwater. If you don't want to get sick, don't put your head underwater. And swimmers were like, that's not possible. So where you would have swimming and rowing and all these water-based events, that water was coming from waterways that were infected with bacteria and toxin. That would make you sick. Here's a quote. Water pollution has long plagued Brazil's urban areas, where most sewage isn't collected, let alone treated. In Rio, much of the waste runs through open-air ditches to fetid streams and rivers that feed the Olympic water sites and blight the city's picture postcard beaches. So you would have a guy who's been training in a sterilized pool, in a chlorine-infested pool, in deepest Russia for the past 18 years, and now he's swimming in this pool that is full of bacteria and viruses. His immune system isn't going to be able to handle it. It said prime beaches remain deserted because the surf is thick with a putrid sludge and periodic die-offs leave the Olympic lake littered with rotting fish. So it was not the cleanest water supply. You go, what does this have to do with SpongeBob SquarePants? Here was a bit of pushback on the conspiracy theory. There was no SpongeBob video. There was no hijacked broadcast. What happened was just the water supply over there is so bad that you had an outbreak of some sort of stomach disease, some sort of intestinal bug that did cause a bunch of kids to poop out half their body weight. And they covered it up. The Brazilian government was like, dude, it's 3 days till every major country, and some minor ones, come here to compete in the games. We don't want the news headlines to be about all these kids in the hospital. So just bury it. And from that, and they didn't hear anything about it in the media, but they're like, well, that's weird, because I got sick, and this other kid down the street got sick, and this kid got sick, and no one was explaining it was some sort of intestinal bug in the water that was going around because they didn't want to have the bad coverage. The conspiracy theory could have pulled up and they said it's weird that all of these kids got sick around the same time, and that's the time that SpongeBob SquarePants is showing up. But again, if it was that intestinal bug, we didn't see any massive outbreaks of explosive diarrhea among the Olympians. So it could have just been First off, it could have never happened. There could have never been an outbreak of 4 pounds of diarrhea across Rio. That's the most logical answer, and the whole thing is just made up. Secondly, it could have happened, but it had nothing to do with SpongeBob. It just had to do with really, really bad water quality, and that story was covered up. And then 2, it happened. It was related to SpongeBob for whatever reason. Someone either did it on accident, someone put in a frequency that shouldn't have been there, or someone did it on purpose. So, let's use our imagination caps. Carpenter Copter has landed in Brazil. We're spraying it out because I told you to hang your butt out the side. You didn't, and you watched the episode. So we're spraying it out as you shamefully go out to buy a pair of hot pants. And we start to explore the idea that what if, I have no proof of this, but we're just using our imagination caps. What if the SpongeBob broadcast was real and it was a weapon? So around a couple months before the Rio Olympics, there was a rumor going around in conspiracy circles, mostly on 4chan's conspiracy board. And it might have even been on their politically incorrect board. But there was a rumor going around that in, I think it was October of 2016, September, October of 2016, a group of people were going to release an airborne version of Ebola. They were going to launch it first in China, and then they were going to let it spread across all of Asia, Europe, and down into Africa. And the second it started to appear in China, this group, whoever they were never named, it was this nameless group, were going to use their influence to shut down the airports and waterways in and out of the Americas. So North and South America would be completely safe from this. The second it took hold in a city in China, everyone is going to shut down. And the rest of Europe would really have nowhere to go. And the goal of this airborne Ebola virus was to create a world where the Americas ruled supreme. It wasn't just the United States. It was basically like this us versus them, us being Canada, United States, and all of Central and South America, and Mexico. It obviously didn't happen. But what was interesting was it was going on for a while. I know people who listen to the show who are old-timers on 4chan will remember that story. Because it was building for a while. And I remember thinking, that would be awful. And of course, it's possible to bioengineer a weapon like Ebola and make it airborne. You're taking a big risk that you can shut down their waterways before that one person in China hops on a plane, but, the reward is you conquer the globe. You have a planet now that has 2 continents worth of people, and you have everything else. And I guess Australia, well, if they didn't shut down their airways enough, they would be taken over, Japan and all that. But that was a conspiracy theory. And I remember thinking, that could happen. That could happen. But then someone beat us to the punch. So if that conspiracy theory was true, if there was a group planning to unleash airborne Ebola in September of 2016, someone beat us to the punch. There was a huge outbreak of Zika. And for the first time, a lot of people, I had never heard of it before. For the first time, a lot of people all around the world were introduced to the Zika virus. Now, the Zika virus, it's a mosquito-borne virus. You get bit. Once you're infected, you get like a headache. You don't feel that good. You're like, oh, I feel a little lethargic. And then after about 10 days or so, you feel better. You have it in your system for up to 81 days. You're still contagious. And so it takes a mosquito to bite you, but you can spread it through different bodily fluids. And the problem is that if a pregnant woman gets the Zika virus, her baby gets this disease, is at a higher chance of getting this disease called like microphalange, where they have a little tiny head. So massive brain damage. And we started seeing this huge outbreak of this disease in Brazil and in South America. And it came to the point where it spread to America. It came to the point where the governments were like, don't get pregnant. Where the Pope, who, the Catholic Church is against birth control, the Pope was like, it may not be a bad thing if it prevents the Zika virus. Not having a baby may not be a bad thing if it prevents Zika. Because the effects of having a baby infected with this microphalange is lifelong. And I remember watching that virus get a lot of coverage in the media, and I thought someone beat us to the punch. If that conspiracy was true, that the Americas were going to launch this airborne Ebola, someone on the other side said, yo, really? Really? You want to do that? Let me show you what we've developed. Now, the Zika virus had been around for a while, but they had never made a connection between Zika and microphalange. And I know I might be pronouncing that wrong, but the tiny brain disease. And they don't know if it was a new strain of the Zika virus. They don't know why the Zika virus was so really they don't know why the Zika virus was so aggressive this time. And again, in make-believe conspiracy land, you can imagine this. One group is going to launch an airborne Ebola in Asia. Another group says, if you really are going to do that, we will sterilize your entire countries forever. Here's a taste. They release this biological weapon in Brazil, and we see it happen, and they go, okay, if you do your Ebola thing, we're going to make that a permanent thing. Like, here's a little taste of what the Zika virus can do. We can make sure every mosquito that's possible will carry this stuff. We can turn this airborne. We may not be able to Ebola melt your blood out, but we can make sure that every 5th pregnancy from now on in all of your populations, they'll be born with a little tiny baby head. So what do you want to do? And so the Ebola people backed down, and then the Zika virus people said, okay, we're not going to release our full, because it's bad, but it's not as bad as we thought it was going to be. The Zika people are like, okay, you're not doing the Ebola thing, we're not going to sterilize your entire continents. Do I have any proof of that? Absolutely not. I said earlier that Zika could be spread by bodily fluids. A very little known fact, one of the things that can spread Zika is diarrhea. If you have diarrhea, all the liquid can actually spread it. So people at the time knew semen can also spread the Zika virus, but they didn't know about the diarrhea, it being spread through diarrhea. If a little kid has Zika and he goes, oh, I don't feel good, and then 10 days later he's feeling totally fine, not thinking anything of it, he still has a Zika virus in him for 81 days. And the way that the Zika virus, if you wanted it to be a bioweapon, you would need it to target predominantly women, because those are the ones that had to worry about getting pregnant. So let's wrap this all up in a bow. You have a group in America that wants to send Ebola to Asia and win this war, whatever they're waging. The powers that be are fighting against each other. Then you have a group in Asia, Europe, Africa, wherever they're based, and they go, we're not going to let them do that. So they spread the Zika virus in Brazil. And it's not catching on as quickly as they want, because it has come very clear to the health organizations in the Americas, Zika virus is being spread by mosquitoes, and if we can protect pregnant women from mosquitoes, then we can slow the halt of this tiny brain disease. But the people who aren't being protected from mosquitoes, which would be men and children, because they don't have to worry about getting pregnant, they're still getting bit by mosquitoes. They're still like, man, they're getting infected with that Zika virus. So someone on this group, someone in this other conspiracy organization says, well, we know that the women are being protected from mosquitoes because they had to they put all this mosquito netting up. These kids are still outside playing football. So what if these kids who have Zika, we can infect their mothers in another way? People are like, well, how do we do that? And they're like, well, if they have diarrhea and the mothers touch that, they can get the Zika virus. And if they're pregnant or going to become pregnant, this will happen to their children. And then again, the health organizations in the Americas would go, how in the world did all these women just get it? We have all these protective things. We're telling women not to be anywhere near mosquitoes. We're providing mosquito netting for these houses and things like that. So if you wanted to have a bunch of people who had the Zika virus spread it to their mothers in an afternoon, insert a broadcast on television, that a one-time broadcast, no one else would see it, it would just disappear into the ether after it was shown. That would cause all these little kids all over the city to have explosive diarrhea. It would make such a mess. And the mother's cleaning it up and taking her kid and taking the kid to the hospital, and the liquid is everywhere. It's in the taxi cab. It's in the waiting room. It's on the hospital bed. And every single person who touches it would be like, gross. But they wouldn't think of Zika. They wouldn't think that this little bit of liquid can ruin a baby's life forever. This is how we're going to help it spread. And this is another warning to the conspiracy group that's trying to pulverize 70% of the human population, that we are truly willing to redefine the term fighting dirty. And the aftermath of that. It would be a messy afternoon, but even if you only hit 1/10 of the pregnant women in that city, you have women who already have kids, so the chances of them having another kid is higher than just a mosquito flying and biting random women. They get the Zika virus, they have a kid, they have this problem. The tiny brain disease not only affects the family, it affects the economy. Governments need future workers to keep going. So They may try to take us out with Ebola over here, but we can devastate them right now. And we will let them know with this 30-minute cartoon that all bets are off. They better not try anything in a few months. And oddly enough, there was no airborne Ebola, and the Zika virus has pretty much kind of fallen to the wayside.